If you didn't know, my name is Svatmananda, and today's topic is Karma Yoga. Now, the general or the common understanding of Karma Yoga is that you do some volunteer service or work for free as charity somewhere. Is that correct? So how many of you have not heard the term Karma Yoga? Okay, that's really good. So, and everyone else has heard Karma Yoga to be a volunteer service. Is that correct? Has anyone here understood Karma Yoga to be anything else besides volunteer service? Very good. Don't say anything. That's good. I got two people here. All right. So, you see, Karma Yoga are two terms, two words coming from Sanskrit. Now, if we really understand the structure of the Sanskrit language, every word in Sanskrit is based on a root meaning. That root meaning gets modified by adding a suffix or a prefix. It then modifies the meaning of the root. So what happens is that it's really hard to actually distort the meaning of the word when you really understand the root meaning of the word. In English, for instance, we have a word that can mean different things. Did I just lose my voice? Oh, okay. So, and sometimes, like for instance, the word there or there actually can spell differently, sounds the same. In Sanskrit, when we use a particular word, it's really sort of like structured in a way that you cannot miss the meaning of the word. Now, the two words, Karma Yoga, what we're going to do is look at the word yoga first. Yoga is derived from the root word that means to join, to bring together. So if I take two things and I put them together, how would I call them? How would I label them? For instance, if I take a burger and fries and bring in a drink, I can call that a yoga meal, a combination. Okay, so any combination, any two things that you put together is a yoga, because that essentially brings two different things together to make another thing. And for simplicity's sake, we try to label them differently. Because of that feature, yoga becomes also a topic. When I bring two things together, I can say this issue is a topic. So yoga then turns into a topic. It can be a label for something that is a combination of two or more things. Now, let me ask you this. When you do what you know to be yoga, which is exercises, what two things are you putting together? I'm sorry? Asanas and breathing. You could say that, yes. That's why probably it's called yoga. But essentially, yoga is a series, as you know it, a series of asanas, right? A series of postures. And maybe if you take one posture and combine it with another posture, you can say that is a yoga, a combination of two postures. For instance, Surya Namaskar or sun salutations is a series of postures, and so you can say the sun salutation is a yoga because of the combination of postures. And of course, now if you bring in the mantras and you bring in the breathing, you're combining it into a series of things. So for instance, in Sanskrit language, we use yoga for everything that we combine. For instance, the word in English, combination, combos. Okay? You just translate combo or combinations, that becomes a yoga. So we have yogas for everything. It's not necessarily, and it doesn't really mean asana or postures that you do. Because the term itself, yoga, is a combination of two or more things. So that's why I used a hamburger and fries and a drink, because just to get you away from the asana practice. You can combine anything and it becomes a yoga. So understand that yoga simply means a combination of things. It has absolutely nothing to do with the asana or postures that you actually do. Although today, yoga really means the asana practice or the posture practice. Okay, so then let's look at the word karma. And by the way, let me sort of also talk about the pronunciation. In the West, we tend to say karma. The word is a softer, gentler that means karma. Okay? Just for your practice. Learn to say karma instead of karma. Okay? Karma is the right word because when you say ka, it elongates the word, the letter A. Okay? So it's karma. Karma is derived from the root meaning of kr, to do. In English, I would say, I do. Or you do. Of course, when I say I, you, I'm adding a pronoun to the verb to do. Simply that. Karma simply means to do and nothing else. It has nothing to do with stuff coming back to bite you later on. Okay, because that's how we understand karma to be, that it is this bad stuff that comes to bite you at a later date or in another lifetime. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. Karma simply means to do, period. To act. So if I was literally doing a literal translation of karma to English, I would say to do or to act, period. Now when you combine these two words, karma and yoga, you say to do yoga. To do a combination of what? Because here, the yoga, it can be translated in terms of a series of things to do, or it could simply imply that it's a topic about doing. See where I'm going with this? We are doing something, so there's a topic about doing. Or, in other words, there is a topic about the doingness of something. The topic of acting. The question then becomes, why is that a topic? Okay? When something is translated or brought from another culture, we really need to understand the meaning from its original sense before we adopt it into another context or another culture. Now, many times when this transmission takes place from one culture to another, one language to another, what we actually miss out is the essence or the original meaning of those terms. So a lot gets lost in translation. So what happens is that karma yoga was mistakenly translated as either duty, which you probably have heard of, or free labor in an ashram, or doing some charity work, or even yourself doing some physical exercise somewhere. And that is really truly far from it. Okay, let me give you an example. We just finished the World Cup. How many of you guys are into World Cup or soccer? Oh, good number. So, well, I really actually, for the first time, I was rooting for England to win. I'm not a big fan of soccer, but because I was coming to this lecture, I was hoping that England would win, so I could brag about it. But anyway, I'm glad that England got as far as it did. But anyway, we have to talk about the finalists, who were France and Croatia. Now, let me present a scenario for you guys. And I know France won 4-2, but put that aside. Let's assume that after 90 minutes of the game, it was a draw. So finally, they have to go to the penalty kick. And whoever gets the first kick wins the game. Okay? I'm not sure whether that's actually what happens at the penalty, but let's take it that way. So what you have, it's a World Cup. What does that mean? It means that the entire world is watching this game, right? And so you have the television media, you have billions of dollars invested in the marketing of products. There is the entire world rooting for one team or the other. Okay, the entire world is watching this game. What happens? And the penalty kick. There is this guy who's supposed to kick the ball into the goal for his country, whether it's France or Croatia. It doesn't matter. So this guy is standing there. The team is all set up. The goalkeeper is all ready to defend. And this guy then sits there and he's on a post to about to run to kick the ball, and he's then paralyzed. Okay, so what happens when he's paralyzed? He starts thinking about all the things that might happen if he loses the ball. Because if he loses this kick, that means the other team gets to win. That means if he loses, his country will really blame him for losing the world championships. I mean, the entire thing rests on this one guy. So he starts, he's paralyzed because he can't kick anymore. He's like wondering, oh my God, I'm going to let everybody down. I'm going to lose all the money I had. And my kids and my wife, they're going to really I'll feel the shame. They're going to be shamed. They're going to go through the harassment of the public and society. My mistress is going to run away from me. I'm going to lose that car that I was supposed to buy. And he goes on and on and on and on about how he's going to lose the whole thing. You know, we all do that, right? When we want to make a decision, when we have to do something concrete, what do? We get into this mind spin of thinking about different things, what we could possibly do, what we could have done, and what we can do, you know. Or then, once he switches from the negative side, he goes to the positive side. Oh my God, if I win this goal for our country, oh my God, I'm going to be the topmost celebrity. I'm going to be invited by the president. I'm going to get this medal, and I'm going to get a ton of money. And oh, that girl that I wanted, yeah. So we get into these things about the dreams and the achievements that we want. And in every decision-making process that we personally go through, we fluctuate from this negative-positive dilemma. Every time we have a dilemma, that's exactly what it is. We're dancing between what could have possibly happened, what I could have possibly done. If I do this, my boss will approve of me. If I do this, my wife or spouse will approve of it. If I do this, I'll get better income. You know, things like that. That's the unfortunate natural process of a human person worldwide. This has nothing to do with a culture. I'm exemplifying the soccer player because of the world pressures. Okay, going back to the soccer player. So this guy is there and he hasn't kicked the ball yet. Minutes are clicking by, the whole world is pacing and watching the game, and it's like, what's wrong with this guy? the coach looks back and says, "Hey, what's wrong with this guy?" So he calls a timeout, sends a message, gets the player to come back to the sidelines, and he says, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "Well, I'm paralyzed." He said, "Okay, fine, I'll tell you what you do." Remember, the entire world is watching this game. So the coach then says to the player, "I'll tell you what, I know what will happen, what's going to fix the problem. Why don't you do this? Take 10 minutes, go run in the stands and do some free service." Do you think that's exactly what the coach would say? And if the coach would say that, what do you think the rest of the world would be doing during those 10 minutes? When people say that karma yoga is about doing volunteer service, that's exactly what they're saying. It has absolutely nothing to do with free labor. In Sanskrit, we have a beautiful term for that. It's called seva. Seva has its benefits. Charity, doing volunteer service, has absolutely benefits without a doubt. But it has absolutely nothing to do with karma yoga. This is a misunderstanding that takes place, first of all, in India itself, because the Indians who speak the Sanskrit language, they may know the language very well, or they may know the local language very well. They may not understand the English language and the nuances of the English language. So what happens is, if I'm trying to describe a word that I'm familiar with in Sanskrit, and I think, oh my God, okay, what's this? Yeah, well, maybe duty sounds like the right word. Okay, what's karma yoga? Doing your duty. Patch that on. Okay, well, somebody else might have heard, oh, karma yoga, it's about working, doing. Okay, well, maybe it's the topic about doing. Oh, well, here it is. Free labor. And everybody buys it. Books are written on karma yoga to do free labor. Has absolutely nothing to do. Karma yoga is actually to help us deal with the dilemmas we face in making decisions. It really is about attitude adjustment. When I was a consultant many years ago, I'd work in the high-tech world. That's my original background, is in data communications and electronics. And one of the things that I'd do is actually go around lecture on the technological aspects of data communications, which we all do nowadays. And soon after we finish our daily lectures in the evening, there was this session that they called attitude adjustment. It was basically where you would go and get some drinks and just decompress for the day. And I really like that term, attitude adjustment. So basically, karma yoga is really, the way I present it, is really about attitude adjustment. The question is, whose attitude? Not anyone else's, but yours. How do you adjust your attitude? In every situation that you are in, except when you're happy, of course. If you're happy and content, that's okay. That's where you need to be. But then, if you're angry, you need to adjust your attitude, not the person who made you angry. If you're jealous, you need to adjust your attitude, not the person who's causing or who is the instrument of your jealousy. So karma yoga really is this great way of understanding how do you transform. It's about your own personal transformation, which is incredible because we're all trying to be happy. We're all trying to be good people. We're all trying to be content. And that's what karma yoga is all about. Is how do I deal with difficult situations and deal with it without getting worked up. Karma yoga simply is a teaching, an understanding of understanding how do we practice a certain behavior, how do we interact with the world without losing our mindset. without losing control of our emotions. In fact, it gets to a point, if you really are a good karma yogi, you would actually be content, pleasant, and contained in every possible situation, even though you might be in the middle of a war. That is exactly what the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is. Have you guys heard of Bhagavad Gita? Who hasn't? Okay. So many times, Bhagavad Gita is considered to be sort of quote-unquote the Bible of the Indian tradition or for Hindus. And that's, again, far from it. It's actually a teaching where Lord Krishna is advising one of the greatest warriors in time on fighting a war which he doesn't want to fight. It's actually a worst case scenario presented for us human beings to look at our own behavior, the wars we have in our minds, the challenges we talk about daily. From the time we wake up in the morning till we go to bed, there's always a war in our heads. Okay. Am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? Do I do this the right way? That war that we battle with every day of our waking hours is actually presented in the worst possible case scenario so that we can deal with it. Once we understand the worst case scenario, we can apply it in our daily lives. So here you have Lord Krishna telling the general, the military general, that he needs to fight the war. He's in that situation. And in that situation, he also has the dilemma, like the soccer player who is about to kick the ball, who actually is stuck. He's paralyzed with worry and indecision. How many times in your life have you been paralyzed with indecision? How many times have you been paralyzed with confusion? That's when Karma Yoga comes in every instant. Okay, so in that worst case scenario, Lord Krishna tells him, this is part of what you need to do. It's part of your Karma Yoga. You need to do what you're supposed to do because that's what your commitment was or is. You have to follow through once you make a commitment in the right way, following the principles of Dharma. Okay. In that process, your attitude, how you deal with that situation, how you fight the war, how you make a meal, how you do your job, how do you talk to your kids, how do you talk to your spouse, how do you talk to your parents. In all of that, in every transaction, how do you do that in an attitude that is pleasant and within the confines of Dharma? Within the attitude or in a way that is right. How do you do that? That's what the Karma Yoga process is. In fact, if you can transform yourself, because this is what we all are looking to do. It's a transformative process for us to be in a place of happiness and contentment. You get to a place, and this is something I can assure you, you get to a place where nothing phases you. If you can do that, you are a Karma Yogi. Okay. Where nothing truly bothers you. It doesn't mean you are emotionless. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you get to a place where you can deal with any situation and not be fazed by it, but you do the right thing by following through in what you are expected to do, what you're committed to do. And that's what Karma Yoga is about. In fact, Karma Yoga is one of the greatest spiritual practices for personal transformation. It doesn't need religious books, and it doesn't need a mandate from a church or an organization. It requires an understanding of how do you live in accordance to the principles of the universe, which is Dharma, and you do the right thing. How do you respond to difficult situation without getting upset? You'll find that if you actually practice Karma Yoga well, you'll be always content without even being fazed or disturbed by the situation. And this is the true teaching of this culture. You see, we actually need to do yoga, the asana, the postures, because that's what helps us control our mind. The mind is like the wind, and you cannot control the mind. So what we do is we employ these practices of yoga and meditation to steer the mind, to pacify the mind. Why do you need to do that? Is because you want to create space for personal reflection. You want to create space where when you hear words of wisdom, you integrate that into your life. And so, what yoga really means in terms of the Vedic tradition is that it is a way of combining your body, your mind, and spirit. It's a synchronization methodology to synchronize your spirit, mind, and body. What happens is, like for instance, when you're driving a car, your car takes you one place, you as the driver wants to go somewhere else, and the spirit, your body, is sort of confused in that situation. Okay, this is how we behave in a normal situation in our lives. So when we're in sync, that means when we're able to bring our mind, body, and spirit together, you find that we respond to every situation in a more ethical way, without feeling the pressures of likes and dislikes. So part of Karma Yoga really is to not remove our likes and dislikes, but put it into a place where we can manage them. Yeah. So what happens in our daily lives is that we spend most of our time dealing with what I don't like. Most of our problems in life is what I like and I'm not getting it. Yeah. How do I get what I really want? And if it's not me, then if you're a parent, especially mothers, of course, I want my kids to get what I don't want, what I didn't get. Yeah. So we spend a lot of our time actually dealing with our likes and dislikes. Karma Yoga is about modulating that, pacifying that, working within the energies of the universe to see that you are in alignment with what your purpose is here for. So when you're in sync, then you come into alignment of what you are supposed to do in this lifetime, what you are expected to do in this lifetime. So it is one of the greatest practice, a great spiritual practice to adopt if we know how to do it. Unfortunately, we don't, because when you hear Karma Yoga is about volunteering, that's what you do. And it's really a waste of time. It's like telling the guy who's supposed to kick the ball to go do some volunteer work in the stands for 10 minutes. How is that going to help him with his decision-making process? How is that going to help him with doing the kick? Okay. So understanding Karma Yoga is really about redirecting our own behavior and understanding our behavior in a way that we can actually bring our purpose of this life in synchronization and being authentic to what you're meant to do, what you're supposed to do, and who you really are. So that's actually the nutshell. Now I'm sure that raises a lot of questions. So what I'm going to do is We can go really deep into this, but let me take on your questions right now, and then that way I can bring other topics in. So if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them now. Yeah. Well, you have to realize the warrior is a highly accomplished warrior. He was not like, probably one of us, and he was part of the culture. He had tremendous training and wisdom, so he was a highly, highly, highly accomplished warrior. And when Krishna said, go fight the war, he actually, much later, 18 chapters later, actually went and fought the war. So if a guy like that, who is highly accomplished, struggled with that issue, what about us? Yeah. So you find that that story is really powerful in understanding why did he go fight the war when, if you know, our whole tradition, in the Indian tradition, is about ahimsa. It's about non-hurting. So how can you say on one hand, do not hurt, yet on the other hand, go kill? And what's worse is that he had to kill his guru. And that's one of the greatest, what we call sin. Although in the Indian tradition, we don't consider sin to be something, a concept that exists. We actually say papa, which is negative karma. But when you hurt a guru, or for instance a Swami, you get one of the worst negative karmas, So on one hand, you say don't hurt plants, don't hurt animals, don't hurt the universe, don't hurt the earth. And then on the other hand, here's a guy, an avatar, that says go kill. How do you reconcile that? And that's the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, actually. Yeah. So yes, to answer your answer, in short, he did fight the war, and he won. The reason was that he had to protect Dharma. So he had to do, that was his calling. Now, if he was a priest, of course, then he wouldn't be told go fight. It's like the soccer player, that's his job, is to kick the damn ball. Yeah. I mean, he's not this guy who does the cleaning on the sidewalk, or who's on the side the stalls serving popcorn. I mean, if the guy who was serving popcorn was brought into the field and told to kick, then that was probably a mistake. But here, this guy was trained, a greatly accomplished warrior. So that was his job. And that was the moment when he had to fight. He couldn't wimp out. And that's what he was doing, really. He was wimping out. He was not doing what he's supposed to do. But that doesn't equate to duty. You see, that's the difference. You say you do your duty, what does that really mean? It was really meant for this person to actually follow through what he was meant to do at the right time. The guy who was a soccer player had to kick the ball at the right time. Not worry about the consequences of it. That's not what he was supposed to do. He was just supposed to kick the ball. Of course, deal with the consequences later. Okay? Yeah. Go ahead. Sure. Yeah, so you say, okay, let's play with that. Okay. And this is a real, you see, what I'm trying to do is I'm encouraging you guys to think. Because we hear these terms, and what does these terms really mean? So you can say that karma yoga is yoga of action. Okay, that's really a better translation to begin with. But then you say, well, it's about purifying your heart. And how exactly does that happen? Well, I understand, and that's what I'm trying to do, is like I'm trying to lead you to that. You see, you say that, yes, it is a process of removing your ego in it. First of all, the concept of removing your ego doesn't exist. It's a misnomer. Because as long as you're alive, you're going to have an ego. We're talking about not removing your ego, because that doesn't really happen. I have never met anyone who doesn't have an ego. You need an ego to survive. The question is, how? What's the amplitude in terms of your ego. If you have exaggerated ego, that needs to be pacified. But in order to conduct, in order to survive, in order to live, just have your meals, in order to sleep, you need ego. Ego is necessary just for simple transactions, but then you need ego to say, I want to volunteer. Okay, and you need ego to say that I'm going to place myself in a situation where my likes and dislikes get modulated, which actually is a serving. But let me put it this way. When you say you want to be you want to gain a PhD in psychology, or in any field you want to get a doctorate in any field, okay? And all you do is go to kindergarten, will you actually get there? And so what happens is doing the volunteer service, or putting yourself outside and volunteering to say, okay, well, I'm going to volunteer in this and do something I don't like to do, that is like going on a KG level, on kindergarten level. Sure, yeah. Because it's important for us to understand. I mean, it's really important for you to ask questions and not take what I say to be true, because I could be lying. Right. But you see, you don't need to do that, because like in Arjuna's case, that was his profession. You know, you could do the same thing in every day that you work. You don't need to step out of your boundaries of what you do to go do some volunteer work. You know, every day you go to work. I mean, sometimes you deal with a boss that's annoying. Sometimes you deal with your colleagues that you can't stand. That's when you apply karma yoga. By going to a volunteer place, what does that really do? It, in fact, does two harmful things. One, it takes away, it minimizes the actual teaching of karma yoga. Because now you just say it's a volunteer service, and this is what's going on in the West, is that we say karma yoga is a volunteer service because that's what they say. They don't talk about the fact that you need to transform. Now, if I was told that karma yoga is for my personal transformation, and because I need to go through a personal transformation, this is what I need to do, I'd be happy to do that. But then if you say, hey, just go do some volunteer service, I'm like, I'd rather watch TV. Yeah. Or I'd rather read a book. Or I'd rather do something else. Why do I need to go do volunteer service? So we say that you do volunteer service, that is actually a misdirection. Because then we get caught up in that loop. And then we write books about it, and then it becomes a whole dogmatic system about doing volunteer service. Unfortunately, and that's what's happened. I mean, I'm talking about what has happened so far. But now I gave you today, if you have an argument about the definition of the two words, karma yoga, and in the context of Bhagavad Gita, then we can say, how does that present itself? Let's look at what's being said about karma yoga versus what the Bhagavad Gita teaches and what the actual definition of karma yoga is, according to Sanskrit. Now you can say, well, my definition of karma yoga is wrong because karma means something else. And that's a good argument if I said something wrong. But you see, when we say do some volunteer service, we're actually missing the boat. Because what karma yoga is about, you don't have to do anything extra. Whatever you're doing from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed, every person you deal with, that's when you apply karma yoga. You don't need to get out of your sphere of action. From the moment you wake up, the conversations you have, how can this person not disturb me? That's when you use karma yoga. I just got upset. What did I do there? You do a timeout and you ask yourself, how can I change this? How can I transform myself? I'm not saying you should be a mat. That's far from it. If you're supposed to be a mat, then Krishna would tell Arjuna, be a mat. But here, because he was a warrior, because he was a general, he had to fight the war. It's like in that football game. It was the soccer player, his job is simply to kick the ball. The rest of the players were not called. There's only one guy designated to kick the ball. That was his job. He couldn't do his job. That's why I use the example. The guy was not told to go do a volunteer service up in the stands, because if the coach had told him go do volunteer service in the stands, then he would be completely way off. And when people say go do volunteer service for your benefit, that's like the coach telling the soccer player go do volunteer service because that's going to somehow change your heart to come and kick the ball better. Okay, everything we do in everyday, look, all of us have challenges in life. We all have struggles. In every struggle, that's when we apply karma yoga. Okay. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I'll take some more questions. Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this: what do you understand by Dharma? Right. So you'll find that Dharma is actually, to put it simply, it's the right way of doing things, right? If we use it from an ethical point of view. What's the Dharma of water? It goes from a higher elevation to lower elevation. That's the Dharma of water. What's the Dharma of planets? It rotates in one direction. The Dharma of Earth is to rotate around the sun. The Earth that doesn't wake up one morning and says, I'm so tired, I've been zipping around and around the sun. I'm so bored, I need to change my direction. The Earth that doesn't say that, nor do the other planets. Okay? So what we are looking at in terms of Dharma is actually the natural law of the universe. Okay. So coming to our own behavior, our Dharma is to actually do what we're meant to do at the right time. So if you have a job that you committed to, that's your Dharma at that point. So Dharma and karma are actually two sides of the same coin because they go in alignment. And part of really understanding karma yoga is to actually be in alignment with Dharma, which actually then leads you to a place where you do what needs to be done. If you're a parent, you need to raise your kids until they're able to support themselves. If you're a child, you need to support your parents, because this is the law of Dharma. Okay? So what we're meant to do depends on the role that you're playing at that time, at the right time. And this is exactly why the Arjuna-Krishna example is vital, because he was in the middle of the battlefield. And he had to kind of do that. So Dharma really is doing the right thing at the right time based on what you are meant to do and what you want to do that is in alignment without hurting anybody else. Okay? It's actually, when I got into this tradition, understanding Dharma took a long, long time. And of course now I can simply say it in a few minutes, but I was really struggling with that because I really didn't understand. I didn't get a proper definition. It took me a while to find it, to come to terms with really understanding Dharma. But you see, we as human beings, when we follow what comes to us and follow through without really imposing our likes and dislikes, then that's when we're doing Dharma. So if we reduce our likes and dislikes, we start doing we're following Dharma. At the same time, it should be in a way that's not causing any harm to anyone, or the earth, or the planet. The planet and animals. So every action that we take on, we need to be observant on how we behave and what harm we're causing, to the extent we know what harm is caused. Sometimes we don't, and that's okay too. Okay, so Dharma is really trying to be in a place where you can respond to situations and life in a way that's not harming to anyone, including yourself, by the way. So, and we forget that most of the time. Yeah. Right. That can be what? Yeah. So if we use the soccer player, right? What his skill is to kick the ball. He has no control over the results of that, right? But at the moment, you see, the problem is, as human beings, to say we shouldn't have expectations is a mistake. Why would you do something if you don't have expectations? We need to have a certain expectations, and that's how we have a certain goal, a certain expectation. Now, when I do something, I do not sit around and say, I expect to fail. I mean, nobody does that. When I'm doing something, I'm expecting some positive results. When the soccer player sits there to kick the ball, he's supposed to expect to win. But at that moment, you see, here's the problem. It's not about the future and the past. At that moment, and when you're about to do something, at that moment when he's supposed to kick the ball, all he has to focus on is actually being centered, being focused on how he's going to actually direct that ball into the goal, understanding where the goalkeeper is, where the other players are. Not worried about him failing or worrying about him succeeding and meeting the president or getting all these medals and all the money or losing everything. And you see the fact when you kick the ball, once you kick the ball, what happens? You have to leave that result where the ball goes to Ishvara, to God, to whatever comes out. So what happens there is, what we need to understand with Karma Yoga is, how do we respond in situation in our lives on a daily basis, the decisions we make. How do we focus on the moment of what we're doing? And that's exactly what Karma Yoga is all about. Don't expect, I mean, we expect to win, obviously, but then we're not hung up. So now here's the situation, whether the goalkeeper, the kicker of the ball wins or loses, it doesn't matter. When you come to a point where it doesn't matter because he did the best he could and he left the results, that's a real karma yogi. He did the best he could and he left it all to Ishvara or to the Lord. The end result was meant to be, one way or the other. But what happens there, he can go back and he says, I did the best I could and wasn't meant to win. That's okay. You know what happens after that? He doesn't get depressed, because normally we would be very depressed. I failed miserably. I let my country down in front of everybody in the world who's watching the game. It fell on me, one person. I think in Brazil what happened is when Brazil, 4 years earlier, when Brazil played Germany, I think there were multiple suicides. I think there was some disastrous reactions because Brazil lost that game to Germany. I happened to watch that game actually, and then I was really sad to see because there Germany was supposed to win anyway. You see, what we understand, the more we understand about the universe, we see that certain results were meant to be. That's why sometimes astrology works, because certain results are predetermined. And so when you say that certain results are predetermined, there is a whole dynamics of the matrix which actually manifests something to happen or not. But your job in life is to do one thing only, is to actually do what you're meant to do and do it with full commitment. Okay. When you do that, that's where you actually get the purification of the heart, not by volunteering. Yes, that helps, but it's just barely the surface, scratching. It's scratching on the surface. What you really want to do as a karma yogi is deal with your daily life in a way where your likes and dislikes are modulated and where you don't lose your mind and heart. The goalkeeper, he kicks the ball. If he loses, he's sane. If he wins, all the accolades, recognition, awards, he's still okay with that. Of course he's going to be happy. He's a human being. I'm not saying you shouldn't have emotions. I'm just saying that your happiness and your depression should not depend on a result of your action. And that's the benefit of this teaching. This is where the actual teaching of Karma Yoga is all about, is getting to a place you did the best you could, and that's good enough. Whatever results turned out to be, I'm happy with that one way or the other. Yes, I would be happier if I won, and I'm not so happy because I failed, but hey, in the next time, I'll try to do better. And that's how you move on. Okay? So that's the real, actually, to encapsulate Karma Yoga is really getting to a place where you're okay and you're content with what you did. That's the yoga of action. That whatever you did was the best you could do, and you're okay with that. So your the end results does not determine your happiness or your sadness. Okay?
So what determines the
Prarabdha. I mean, remember, we in our Indian tradition, we have to accept. For me, reincarnation is not a belief. Reincarnation is a fact of life. So if you take reincarnation to be a fact of life, then you have to look at your whole forest of all your actions and of all your actions throughout many lifetimes. So all of our actions are actually based on our past lives. So when we are in a certain place, we are responding to a certain situation, how we respond is based on this present life. The conditions, the fact that, let's say, I'm born a male, that's predetermined. So there's a lot of predetermination, which is actually really well elaborated in the Indian tradition in terms of the Vedas. So in Vedic astrology, for instance, we can predetermine how a person's life is like. What are the successes he or she might have? So how is that possible? Like, for instance, I'll tell you this, that in the last 5 elections in the US, I was able to predict who was going to be the president before the elections were announced. Now, if I or anybody can predict who's going to be the winner, that means there's a system. It's not a question of the ability of the person who's doing the prediction. There's a system of predictiveness. That means there's a collective karma of Americans to actually vote Trump in. So if somebody could determine who is going to win the elections, that means that's preset, isn't it? It's preset that somebody like Trump is going to be the president. So the question is, how does that happen? So there is a whole karmic understanding of not only you as an individual, but there's a collective karma of that society, that culture, that actually brings certain catalysts to become a player in that life, in that community, in that society. So it is a play, like Shakespeare put it very well. He said the stage is but a play. The world is a stage. So, and really, when we really begin to understand how the universe works, how we transact in the world, we just are mere players on the stage, on this world stage. So the whole point then is, how do you play your role? So for instance, if I'm an actor, right, and let's say I'm really, really wealthy, and I play a role of a beggar in a movie, if I play that really well, what happens? I get recognized for my acting ability. But at the end of the day, I make a ton of money. But then I'm able to create space between me as the actor, who has a ton of money, and the person, it's the same me, who is acting as a beggar. I can distinguish that. I do not play the role of a beggar and come home and behave like a beggar. I think Swamiji actually gave the same example early this morning. Okay? So the thing is that whatever role we play in this life, we need to create that space between the roles we play as the actor on this world stage versus who I am. In fact, the last talk was, who am I? So the real objective of this teaching or this endeavor of doing yoga, aligning, understanding our mindset, is actually eventually understanding who are we. That's the real purpose of karma yoga, is to actually create separation between the roles you play and come to a place where you can see the separation between the roles you play and who you are. And when you are able to create that separation between your roles and who you are now ready to figure out or to understand who you really are. But without that separation, if I keep playing, although I have money in the bank, but then I play this role as a beggar, and then I come home and I still continue to play the role as a beggar because that's who I identify with, then that's where the problem is. Karma yoga is to help you create that separation between the role and you. And when you're able to bring that wedge in, to create that valley between between your role and you, then the teaching of Vedanta really begins to work. But when we still identify, if I still identify as the beggar, then I will not know who I am. And what we're doing in life is we're always identifying with who we are. Who am I? We actually glorify the name. Your name is really important. Your sexual orientation is really important. Your role, your job is really important. The house that you live in, or the society, the area that you live in, is really important. These are all identifications, and your ego is tied with that. It doesn't mean that you have to negate your ego. Your ego there, the association of your ego to those things external of you, is what the problem is all about. So we're talking about withdrawing that, modulating that, so you can actually create the space between the actor and the person. Who are you is what we all are looking to understand. If we really know who we are, then we find that everything that happens in the universe, all our transactions, all our miseries, all our pain that we're going through is actually separate from me. Because I've been able to create that valley between my role and who I am. And that's the real teaching of Vedanta. It's as practical as it can be. It actually even helps in terms of our psychological issues, our emotional issues. It really, really is one of the greatest tools for contentment. Yes? You had a question? Oh, okay. All right, I could go on, but anyway. Let's take on the next question. What time is it, by the way? I have no clue. Oh, 5 to... It's time. Okay. One last question, if you have. Yeah. Oh. Okay. It's going to be hot and wet. Last year I predicted, actually somebody just... Oh, yeah, there you go. So I predicted that there's going to be a lot of fires. And so I was actually, after this... I think I predicted it here, right? And... oh, you were here too. Right, and I flew, I spent the summer in Europe, and in September I flew to Seattle, and it was amazing. I'd never seen, I travel around the world quite a lot in the last many years, and I was flying from, actually it was from London to San Francisco, and we went over Canada, and all over Canada, all the way down to the San Francisco area, it was all covered in smoke. We're not talking about fog, but smoke. I mean, the entire West Coast was actually burning. So this year, basically, what I predicted is a lot of rioting. You'll see that a lot of places there's riots, especially now in the summer. We're going to see a lot of shifts, personal shifts. So we'll be sort of uncomfortable because of the events that's happening around the world. In certain places, we're going to see mudslides, especially during the rains. The summer is going to be okay, but the rains and the mudslides, we'll see more events like that. the idea of those predictions were not meant to scare you, but the idea was just to be aware that there's a universal play here that's setting the stage for our emotional reactions and actions. So when you look at every stage, there's a setting, right? And so these worldly situations are settings for our emotional response and reactions. All right. Final? Oh, I still have 10 minutes? Oh, okay. Okay, I do have 10 minutes, so... Well, I didn't want to deprive you of questions. I mean, this is a really good opportunity for you guys to come into clarity in terms of at least getting another point of view. You don't have to believe what I say, but at least to clarify some of the ideas and concepts you have heard, especially with what I presented. But of course, I'm open to questions like predictions too.
I have a question about Arjuna.
Right.
Why Arjuna out of the 5 brothers?
Because he was of the 5. Okay, so this is back to the story of the Bhagavad Gita. There are 5 brothers. He was a greater warrior. He was more skilled. So what happens is you see that if you have 5 siblings, that one person is better than the others in certain areas. So he was incredibly skilled as a warrior. So he was the military guy. The first brother was more like a leader, and so his role, Arjuna's role, was that of a warrior, and he was incredibly good, very well trained. So then he had the role of the strategist, the warrior who's right on the front lines.
So were they, each one of them had their own dharma that came into
Exactly. Yeah. Each one of them had different abilities. You know, if you have a sibling, you find that you're better at one thing than the other. So each of the 5 brothers, they had different attributes, different skills. But Arjuna was actually very skilled as a warrior, so he had to take. Although he's the 3rd brother out of the 5, he was more skilled as a warrior. So then he took on that role. It was his responsibility, really, to lead the army in that war.
I'm not from here. I'm actually from Brazil.
Okay.
So the example you said.
Oh, that's why you jumped when I talked about Brazil. Sorry.
That 7th month became an expression. Like if you're having a really bad day, oh, this is a 7th month day.
Oh, is it really? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's like a 7th month day.
Yeah.
And my question is about, it's like,
By the way, I should tell you that, you know, what I tend to do when I watch games, I always pick the underdog. And so I was with a lot of Germans that day, and it's one of the few World Cups I've actually watched. And in the group, like, everybody was rooting for Germany. I said, oh, well, I'll root for Brazil. So, and I kept hiding my head down. Because I said, come on, 7 goals? I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah, continue, please. Okay, so this is a really good example of karma yoga. So what happens is, by the way, I'm not sure whether this is true, but I hear the Brits complain a lot about the weather. What? Well, actually, I found that to be, well, at least the Brits complain about the weather, and there's good reason for that. The Italians complain about everything. So that's what I'm told. So, I mean, you know, they have a great cup of coffee and they're complaining about the coffee. I mean, so anyway, so nothing against the Italians. It's just that certain cultures have a tendency to complain quite a bit. But you see, when especially we are in an environment where there's forces that are not in alignment to Dharma, not in alignment to what we like, this is where we turn that around to practice karma yoga. So when you see somebody complaining, hey, appreciate that they are in a situation where they're not feeling good about themselves, or they're not, you know, they're using weather as an excuse. Because really, when we're complaining about somebody, it's because of us not being happy inside. That's really what it boils down to. So, when I am complaining about the weather, there's something in me that I'm not happy about, and I blame the weather. All of us, we go to work, we have a horrible day with our bosses. What happens? We come back home and we take it out on our loved ones, right? This is a natural way of behaving. So basically, there's two levels of that. First is to look at persons. If you feel that the person is negative, you recognize you're in the positive place. Be grateful that you are in the positive place. For the person who's complaining, have compassion for them, that they're unfortunately in not a place where you are. It doesn't mean that it brings you to a place of holier than thou, but you understand that you are not letting yourself fall into the trap of criticism. Okay? Every time we criticize somebody, it's because of our insecurity. Every time we blame somebody, it's because of our insecurity. This is where you apply karma yoga to say, hey, okay, let me see how I can retain my positiveness, because what is our point? If we really understand who we are, we understand that we're nothing but love. And that every expression that we undertake, every karma, every action, we call yoga of action, should be from a place of love. A person is negative. Don't let that bother you. Can you not let that person bother you? Can you actually get to a place to have compassion for that? So you can say compassion is actually a secondary step, but the first step is let that person not bother you. You walk down the street and somebody comes and curses you. Let it not bother you. You're driving down the highway and someone cuts you off. Let it not bother you. Can you go throughout your day without anything or anyone, including pets, not bother you? If you can, you're a karma yogi. That's where the real practice comes, because you're learning to transform. Of course, it's easy for me to sit here and say that you need to not let it bother you. What we need to understand is there's a whole volume, a teaching, an understanding to be able to get to that place to say, well, let it not bother me. Because it's easy for me to sit here and say, let it not bother you. But the way you get to a place where it doesn't bother you is to understand who you are and how it works. So the way I got to this place is because I actually went through a teaching. And that teaching actually helped me to come to terms with what's going on. In fact, we have in our tradition, on Swami Dayananda tradition, we have this thing called the Gita home study. It's really the Gita that is expounded into 9 volumes. Now, just to give you a little understanding of that, our guru at that time, he could chant the Bhagavad Gita, which is about 700 verses. He could chant it backwards and forwards. And in fact, he used to teach it too. But then he shared something with me at one point privately, and he said, you know, I used to teach the Bhagavad Gita, but I never really understood it. Until he actually went to a teacher who taught him the methodology to read the Bhagavad Gita. So you cannot read it. He had to be taught the methodology to understand the Bhagavad Gita. He said once he understood that, then the whole vision came to him. Okay, so you cannot read the Bhagavad Gita. You need to follow a right way, the right way, as Swami had pointed out earlier, that we need a live teacher. Why do we need a live teacher? Because when I'm doing something wrong, I need a mirror to tell me that, hey, here are the errors of your ways, or maybe you could do this better. So a live teacher will help correct your behavior, will help guide you without judgment, without condemning you, and by holding your hand, it would actually take you from a place where you are now to the place where you can be, in a place where you don't feel disturbed by your environment or people around you. Yeah. So that is actually the real teaching. The reason why you study yoga is to get your mind in place. When you have a mind ready, then this teaching becomes really valuable for you because you're ready for it. Anyway, that's part of the yoga process. Okay, one last question. We have to do a timeout. One last question.
Do we have to clear our own karma, or can other people clear your karma?
Nobody can clear your karma.
Because I see lots of workshops and things, people say karma clearing.
I know, yeah. Well, it's like this, you know. You can clear your karma just as one can. If somebody else can pay off your debts, that's how you clear a karma. So typically, you can clear your karma. You have to do it yourself. There are ways, by the way, to mitigate it, to offset it, but it's something you have to do because they're your karmas. Nobody else can clear that for you. It doesn't work that way. All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention, and I appreciate it. Very quickly, I was told that I need to give you guys my website. So it's you see my name in the brochure. It's Svatmananda, SVATMANANDA.org. And if you need to reach me there, you can actually just send me an email from the website, or you can do swatmananda@gmail.com, and you can send me questions, comments. If you want to know more about this teaching, I can hook you up with some other teachers wherever you are. Depending on your locality, I can find some other teachers or something that you can study with. All right? Thank you very much.